think are the biggest blockers keeping people from reaching their first 1,000 subscribers?
The biggest blockers, I think, there's going to be a lot of advice that people have out there. And I think the hard part is like having the ability to know like what is going to apply to you at the level that you are at and what's like more broad info that's probably not going to apply to your current situation. Like, for example, if you are doing, let's say, high level production videos, someone might say you should post once a week, right? But if you're like, if it takes you a month to make a video, that's obviously not even feasible for you, right? So it's easy to think like, oh man, how am I gonna make that work? And even the idea that like you have to do something, whenever anyone says you have to do this, you have to understand like what's the intention behind the advice. So a lot of times when people give advice, they're really talking about their own values. So like they say like you have to do blank, like you have to post once a week. I'd say generally once a week is actually a pretty good advice, but it doesn't actually apply to everybody, right? And whenever you're getting advice, a lot of time the thing that's being not said in the beneath the advice is going to be something like the value that they have. So, for example, let's say you want to be a top tier entertainer, like say a Mr. Beast or a Ryan Trahan, right? That advice is very different for someone who wants to be the number one in tech or the number one in podcasts. Like that's not the same thing, and so that kind of advice just won't work, you know. And so somebody might say like you need to have a really good idea, but you may not be an idea-based person. You might actually be more focused on, let's say, like you're like a live stream reaction channel, right? And so for them, like volume is going to be a really big deal. So like posting multiple, clips a day, or even like one a day, multiple a day. That's very different versus someone who's doing like high level production. And so that's number one, is just knowing like how to understand like not all advice is actually for you is like probably the biggest one.
Interesting. And like a lot of point, but even with that, like, I've noticed in self-improvement, it is always like that not all advice is for you. It a lot depends on kind of even where you are coming from, or to what are your goals. And even like the interesting point that once a week is kind of a good kind of thing to have with consistency. But how, like, do you think like consistency, like even with like today's age, is really like, of course it matters, but to like what extent consistency still matters? Because you see creators posting once a month or every 2 months, and they're doing.
There are degrees of consistency, and so I would say no matter what, consistency matters. It depends on to what degree, right? So if I post once every 10 years, I'm technically being consistent. I'm just going to post 10 videos my entire lifetime, right? Versus I'm posting a video every 2 hours. This is also consistent, just way different level of consistency, right? And so what we're really referring to is like generally people think like within the month, how many videos do you upload? It really just depends on who you are, what level you at, and what do you want. I worked with a client that posts once every quarter, so every 4 months they post a video. And for them, that works. They got between 8 to 15 million views per upload, and they were happy with that, right? And they had a very low lift. They had practically no team, right? They did everything themselves outside of me and like one other person. And that worked out really well for them. It was a really good business model. Versus someone else who they go, no, I want to be number one. Okay, well, what you're going to do is very different than what that person is going to do. Because I can say you can't be number one post once a quarter. You just can't. Even if you do high level production, I'd say the minimum, I'd say was once a month is what people should probably lean to. Because at least like, okay, you're doing high level production, and so you're going to get a lot farther with every post. So every post, let's say you're getting between like 2 to 8 million views. That's actually going to go way farther for you once a month, because that's the average. If you got 8 million, average of 1 million views a week from one video, not four, right? And if you ask me what's a better place to be in, would I rather be a guy who makes a video a week, it's 1 million views a week per video, right? Or 8 million views per one upload? It really depends on like, what do you want, right? Because I can't tell you what you want, right? If that 8 million video was way harder than the other four, then I would say, well, you want to get the most amount of reward for the least amount of effort and the least amount of spend. I would say like any normal person would want these things. But if that's not your goal, if your goal is like, no, I don't care about the effort, I don't care about spend, I just want to be the best, right? That's that's what they want. My whole idea is like, I believe everyone should get what they want, but it's not up to me to decide that, right? At the end of the day, it's gonna be up to you to kind of decide that. And so I would say like The level of consistency I normally tell people to do is you should have somewhere between one upload a month to about four uploads a month. This is generally where most people should sit.
To have
Yeah, I think like when it comes down to like if we could just define what everyone says that quality, like let's like define quality for a second. To me, quality is about meeting the demand of a certain market, right? And so like we can take an example like a Hershey's chocolate bar. Most can agree this is not quality chocolate. This is very bad chocolate, most would say, right? Yet it meets the demand of their customers. And so to their customers, they think this is really good. And that's all that matters. They don't have to serve, everyone in the world. They just have to serve their specific target demographic. And with YouTube videos, it's the same thing, right? Because people say like, wow, this is a quality video. Wow, this is a quality intro. But they don't really define what quality is, right? And I talk about this all the time where people say like, what do you have to do in your intros for them to do well? Well, who's your audience, right? And so if you do a podcast, it's a really slow start. It's a really slow video. You got to fade in. Most people would say that's a bad intro. Maybe to us, it's really boring. That's what a lot of people say, where it's like, oh, no one wants to watch somebody talk for 8 hours. Like, yeah, sure, to us it's boring, but not to 10 million people it's not, right? And so if your goal is to get a portion of that 10 million view audience, well, then that's not bad. Like if you've got 10% of that audience, that's a million views, right? And I know this because I've done this myself. There's a video that I worked on that's on a channel called Starmus, where they had Neil deGrasse Tyson talk with three other moon landing astronauts. And the intro was really boring and the video is really long and it's like not very interesting to me, but maybe not to the 500,000 people that watched that video. It's very interesting to them. And so once you understand who your audience is, your framework will start to make itself, right? And so I did a video, or I worked with a channel called Liquid Genius, and our niche that we're in is super competitive. We want to be like the top 1% of podcasts. That's as competitive as you can possibly get. So there, we can't do that because we will not be number one in the podcast space if we follow that same kind of audience. We have to follow the audience that's kind of already taken. So we have to be super aggressive about our strategy, and we have to be super aggressive about our trailers, about our intros, about our questions. Everything has to be as aggressive as possible because otherwise we just won't be the 1%. And so I give strategy here very different type of direction and advice versus over here with Starmus, which is like, yeah, you can do a fade in, yeah, it can be slow, yeah, it can be super niche, because that's what our audience wants. And so that's really what you want to define is like, who's the audience you're trying to get, and then we can start defining
your even intro. Even or
Yeah. No, so this is what's actually a great question. I make thumbnails the same way, right? To make a like if you were to make the 1% of videos on YouTube when it comes to demand quality, right? Like you can spend like, Beast Team, they spend over $3 million per video. So if I was going to do that, like that's not an easy expense. It's a very high barrier to entry expense. Thumbnails are not high barrier to entry. You can make the best thumbnail on the planet and it's like free to make the best thumbnail on the planet. Because what we're talking about is an image, right? Like, I mean, literally, like AI generation can generate an image that is the best thumbnail on the planet, right? So it's so simple to where like this is literally something that can be done by yourself. And so when it comes to thumbnails, they're like the way I approach it is exactly the same. The difference would be in framework, and the difference would be in niche. And so if I'm doing any kind of kids creator concept, that's going to be very different than someone who is niche scientific type concept, right? because I want a very different audience. And so, but when it comes to the tools of the trade, the tricks and the things that I use to grab people's attention within the two-dimensional image, it's pretty much similar. I think it's like very similar in most regards. Most people won't say that because they look at like, you look at a kid's creator, they're gonna have a lot of saturation versus an adult creator, maybe a little less saturation. But the truth is, like, there is saturation, just not as like overwhelming and overstimulating, right? Because they're for adults versus more for children. But that's not to say like, you can technically like desaturate a children's thumbnail. It can still actually work as long as you're doing the other stuff right. Same thing with the channel that's making content for adults. And so where it's going to differ more so is in philosophy and in ideology of like, what do kids like versus what do, specific niche adults like. And once you understand that, then you apply the exact same tricks and just in a very different form of execution, if that makes sense.
Yes, it makes. And like what are the, even some want to get even like the frameworks and philosophies you use?
Yeah, 100%. So frameworks are kind of interesting because it's basically like, we already know a lot of frameworks work. So let's say like we're doing a podcast. I can already tell you your CTR is going to be higher if you have 2 people in your thumb versus 1 person in your thumb. And so the odds of you getting more views are higher if you just put like the face of the guest and the host. But I found out why this worked. I went to DOAC, which is Diary of a CEO, and I scrolled back to all of their catalog videos, trying to figure out like what was the day when they had a big aha moment, and I'll see the difference in viewership discrepancies. So one day I kept scrolling all the way back, and eventually I found the video that went from their average view per upload was about 800K, and then they uploaded a video that was at 3 million out of nowhere. And the difference was they put 2 people in the thumbnail. They put Steven and they put the guest in the thumbnail. And I couldn't figure this out for a while because I was like, why? Like, why does putting Steven in the thumbnail make this work better? Eventually, I did actually figure it out. So it's the thumbnail where he's like biting his nails and he looks worried, right? And I realized like Steven gave people a emotional and visual response of how they're supposed to be responding to the information that they're seeing. And so when he looks worried, they're like, oh, wait, what? I'm supposed to be worried? And then now they have to double back and read the text again. And they got to read the title again. Now they're like, well, why? Like, why should I be worried? So now they feel the need to impulsively to click, where before they don't have Steven's emotional expression guiding how they should respond to the information. They just have the guest. But the guest is giving us no actual value outside of the look that they have. So like, if we say like this person's a scientist and they look like a salesman, I don't believe that person's I don't believe that person's a scientist, right? But if they look like they haven't seen the sun in like 5 days, and they got a beard, they got glasses, like me, right? Then I'll say like, oh shit, like that person is a scientist. Like look at him, he looks like a mad scientist, perfect, right? And so it's one of the reasons why like it's kind of funny, but like Roman Yaplansky's brand is doing so well because he looks like he fits the mold like really really well, and he's super serious like when he talks in his videos, and so that actually works really well for the thumbnail because you see this guy giving you like the worst news ever, like, oh, we're all gonna die because of AI, and then you see Steven being like, wait, what? That's why that's their highest viewed video on Diary CEO is over 20 million views, is because this angle works so perfect. It's obviously super topical, but they did everything else right on top of that, which is like, yeah, you're gonna get a 20 million plus view pod on with all the stuff they do, right? But I can't give any of that advice with the framework for someone else who's entirely different. So let's say you're doing a thumbnail for the royalty family, right? With them, it's very different. So notice how I'm talking about the expression of Steven. We're gonna do that same thing, but for kids now. So for Steven, it's very grounded. Like he's giving the emotion, but it's not like exaggerated, right? We're not like looking into the lens of the camera, pointing at something, right? Like look what this guy said. Like that's obviously very like for a younger audience, right? But here we're gonna do that totally when it comes to kids content, and so that's something you can do where it's like we really want to drive the point home that this is for children, and that's going to get us more kids to keep watching because that's how we get the right audience, right? Because it's not just about getting 26 million views per upload. It's really about like getting 26 million views per upload of the right audience. And so if an adult watches it, we don't really care, like great, but at the end of the day, like we really just want to make sure we get our audience that's watching more so than just like everyone in the world, right? But specifically, we're going after families. So when we get adults, we want them to be parents, or they want to be like older siblings that happens to watch it with their kids or with their siblings, sisters, brothers, etc. And so, but here it's like, so we don't do the split. We don't do text. I mean, text is pretty minimal because kids, like obviously reading for them is a little smaller. So whenever we are doing text, it's like one word or 2 words, maybe, right? So we're very specific on what text are we putting here versus like with a pod, we don't have to be as specific, but we actually have to be as dense, like denser with our text. And then obviously we want to be like stimulated, but we also want to help the viewer with like ease of reading the thumbnail. And so like I did a thumbnail where we had Prawn coming out of a vent, and he's in like the top left corner, and the first thing you see is eyes. So like whenever you're looking at a person's face, like we recognize the whites in people's eyes more than anything else in the face. And so that's the thing. If there's anything to focus on, it's the whites in their eyes. Make sure these whites stand out because it's the first thing that every human being will see. Not the pupil, it was interesting. Not the mouth being open, which by the way, no one should do that. That does not bring up your CTR. It's literally just the whites specifically. And we put that right in the left quarter because what will happen is like if you get an American speaking or European speaking audience, like anyone from the West, you'll be reading from left to right. And so the first time that you look at a thumbnail, every single person does it. They look in the top left corner. If you have like a little eye tracker, that's exactly what you would see. And then what happens is they kind of just go sporadic after that moment, if they have nowhere to look. But if you can guide their eyes, you will start to get them to follow the way you want them to. So we put run, I like to put faces, especially for kids, in top left, because they're going to read through their eyes. And then we put text almost eye level to his face. So you just go straight line eyes text, and the text is an arrow down to the information we want you to focus on. And so just one little swoop, you get all the info you want in like a split second. And so by the time you hover, you get that. Now it's important for it to be quick because when you hover over, it's going to go away. And so we want them to stop, hover, get it by the time like you have like a true 1 second delay before it starts to do hover play. And so we want them to get it in that 1 second and then hover play. And then the hover play should get them at this point. And they read the text like, oh shoot, maybe I do want to watch this. And then we got them up to that point. And so those are like the two biggest examples I can have when it comes to like completely different frameworks.
Interesting. It seems like the things are always like changing, especially in or like the question would be, are there things that are just, you've been in the space for so long, are there things that are not just changing constantly? Are there like kind of fundamentals that like yes, this will be true even from the kind of psychological standpoint, or even like the eyes, it is very even almost scientific that how kind of the psychology of it works. So are there any kind of fundamental principles that work no matter of the niche or the anything?
Yeah, I think like at the end of the day, like we're talking about people, right? And so we don't have to understand like all these tricks and all these like other stuff. It's honestly, it's really tempting to want to chase like, oh, it's this new thing. If you don't do this new thing, you're gonna be left behind. The only time where that's true is probably AI, but let's just put that aside for a second. But like anything else, it's like, oh, there's this new thing. If you don't do this new thing, you're gone, sort of thing. And like these are technically they're true, just not as true as they're letting you on to believe. At the end of the day, we're talking about people, and people are the same. And so I make bets where like there are micro changes and there are macro changes. And I think what's more important is a macro change, not a micro change. Like a macro change is like, here's a new thumbnail format. Like I don't chase that, or like a trend. That's a macro change. Like I don't chase trends. I tell everyone like if you're chasing trends, this is it's a quick road to hell. Is chasing trends, right? And so you can use a trend. It can help you get out of a quick tight spot, but you can't rely on trends for a business model. It's not going to work, And so what I do think is important is the macro. And so macro is like 400 years ago. Like you can read in Shakespeare's work, he uses the word liar, and 400 years later we still use the word liar. It means the exact same thing it does then, right? This is a never-changing thing. I guarantee you another 400 years from now, the word liar is going to mean the exact same thing. The word is just too useful for us to trade it out or get rid of it, right? And there's certain elements in our DNA that we find it's like it's too useful to get rid of. So like the whites in the eyes, as long as humans have eyes, this will always be true because it's just too damn useful. It's like the most recognizable feature on the face. And so with the macro stuff, I find this is important because it's honestly really hard to change this stuff, right? Like unless we all have like implants in our head, like that would be a big macro change. I'm like, okay, that's pretty important. I'm going to pay attention to this, right? Or we all figured out that we are in a simulation and this is how you leave the simulation. That's a macro change. That's pretty damn big. Like I'm going to focus on that heavily, right? But it's rare to see a macro change. And so it's easy for people to claim there is one. The odds are it's probably just not happening. It's probably just overblown. And so when I'll make a title that's like, learn this in 20 minutes, or give me X and I'll give you this in return. The trick here is like, as long as people are lazy, this is gonna work. And I'm willing to bet another 400 years down the road, people are gonna still be lazy. And as long as that's still true, this title will still work. And that's why, like, saying the time, like, learn X in just 20 minutes. Why that still works is that people are still lazy, and I think they're just getting lazier, right? Another one is like, I think people are bored most of the time. They have nothing to do. They're just bored. Like, what do I do with my time? And they want this quick dopamine rush. I believe that's true. And as long as that is true, entertainment's going to always work, right? And so we just make these macro bets rather than micro bets. And so I don't look at micro. It's useless. Like, sometimes I'm like, oh, let's get a quick 1 out of 10 by copying the X, Y, and Z, like, the outlier theory. Like, yeah, let's get a quick 1 out of 10, just copy them today. And it's helpful in the short term, but in the long term, it's useless. So I barely focus on that stuff anymore.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, because the psychology, I guess, doesn't change. And like you touch on the topic, like, do you think is there a right way to copy somebody, like to copy some thumbnail or something? Because I see a lot of people doing it, and it just this limiting belief, kind of, even in my head, that it worked for them. If I just copy it, it will not work the same for me. But I don't know if that applies to YouTube. So, like, is there a right way to copy?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's interesting because, like, when we copy, I think, like, if you copy a thumbnail that, like, you just see a thumbnail that works and you copy it, it's probably going to help your videos get more views than normal, right? If you remember, like, the 7 levels format, jumped on it at the time, you will probably get more views than you normally get. Even if you do, like, all you have to do for the format is the rainbow borders, and then each border is a level, and it's a different person. And what's cool about this is you're giving your opinion on what you think. So, like, if you say, like, the 7 levels are rappers, if you put, like, Jay-Z at the bottom and then, like, Tupac at the top, you're giving your opinion from the thumbnail alone. So now people have to click to see, like, why do you even think that, right? So it's very effective on that front. And if you jumped on it quickly enough, you would actually get benefit from it. And so the right way there is just understanding, like, what in the format can you change and what in the format can you keep. So, like, if you're looking at, like, the greats thumbnail that, like, Nick does, and then you had him on the pod, the right way to do this is, do you have the white background and do you have the subject in the very lower center with an arrow and text above? As long as you have these things, everything else can be interchangeable. And, like, in fact, if anything, you can improve upon the thumbnail. Right, that's what I encourage everyone to do. When you find a winning format, improve upon it. See how can you make it better rather than just 1-to-1, right? And so once you understand the fundamentals of what makes it work, then you can improve upon it. So to me, as long as you understand, like, these are the fundamentals that cannot change, and once you apply those, the odds are it's probably going to do better for you than if you didn't apply it.
How can people even see what are those fundamentals? Because, sometimes it can be work, sometimes it can be the person, or like how do they decide, like, oh, this is what works?
Yeah, so that's going to come down to discernment. And if you make discernment without educating yourself, you'll always make the wrong decision. And so how do you self-educate? Well, you study, right? So, like, if you study one thumbnail and go, cool, I got it, you probably didn't get it. But if you study 1,000 thumbnails, it's going to be really hard for you not to see the correlators here. But the truth is, I can say that most people who listen will not study 1,000 thumbnails. They just won't. Even if I, like, that I promise you'll get, 1 million views or whatever from it, they will not do it. Because, again, people are lazy. They don't work very hard. And so that's really what it comes down to, is, like, it just comes down to doing a brute forcing your way through a great deal of work. And if you are able to do that, you will see the insights that are, very obvious to people like me, but they're very hard to see for people who just aren't willing to do stuff like that.
Interesting. That makes sense. It's just, at the end of the day, it's kind of just, you need to study thumbnails, I guess. But, like, one thing you said even in the podcast, that is, like, even for the beginners, that I'm even, like, trying to, like, copy some thumbnails or something, whatever, is, like, focusing on the, like, big stuff. Even we talked about, like, the fundamental stuff, and, like, then the details kind of come later. Because you, like, gave an example that, the texture of the break, like, will not really help when kind of the fundamentals are not in place. So, like, wanted you to expand on that too.
Yeah, it's because it's the big fundamentals are the real fundamentals. Everything else is fake, right? So I use this analogy a lot when I talk about, like, the depth into understanding something. So, like, if I showed you a cake with certain frosting, people can be like, "Oh, that cake looks good." But if I showed you the exact same cake with no frosting on it, you'd be like, "Oh, that." Most people would be like, "That cake looks bad." And what's funny is I changed 10% of the cake. The frosting is not the cake. The cake is the layers within it. That's actually where the cake is. But you can't see the layers within it. You can only see the frosting. So you're judging the quality of a cake by 10% of the whole thing, right? And so when people talk about like those tiny details and changing, where it's like font choice, or it's like tiny design decisions, that's talking about the frosting. And I'm like, yeah, I understand that like it seems like this is where the value comes from, but I promise you, it's like way deeper below this. It's like because when we talk about like psychology, which is cool, but I prefer human behavior, because human behavior is what we're really trying to get at. We're not trying to get them to like think about the thumbnail a certain way. We want them to click on the thumbnail. And to get them to click is like, this is not a frosting problem. This is a layered cake layer problem. And that's like way deeper and way richer, and it gets to the source of what's actually going on. And so, yeah, and so if you have someone that's scrolling and, let's say that like, you think of the headspace of a person who's like, I'm going to jump on YouTube. They probably have a very specific video they want to watch. Then on their homepage, YouTube knows what they're doing. They're probably going to watch, if they constantly watch science videos, they're like, okay, here's the latest science video. They're going to love this one, right? And they're going to be like, oh, interesting. Like, I'm deprived of science information because that's what I always watch. Can't wait to watch this new one, right? And it's interesting to be like, there might be two different thumbnails they're looking at. Or it's like one is, for potassium, and one is just nobody who makes a science video. They're going to pick potassium every single time, like, because these guys understand what I'm talking about more than anyone else, because they're the only ones that are making entirely new formats that no one else is seeing, simply from sociological and scientific perspective of like how to make good thumbnails that get people to engage. And it's just like, really, for them, it's about visually teasing big questions and teasing the idea that the video will have big answers to those big questions.
Yeah. Interesting. Even like yeah, I guess human behavior is the better word, but and even like wanted to get like you talk a lot about telling a story like within your thumbnail and your title, and like wanted to kind of get more into kind of deeper into your process that like you pick of like what even pieces of the story, or how can you even tell a story in that like kind of short amount of kind of even space and time that people have to read. So I wanted to know like kind of even your like even if you have some frameworks for that for telling a story, because I think even that's a big piece of kind of this human behavior, like kind of story.
I do use storytelling tricks in thumbnails, but you don't necessarily have to tell a story in a thumbnail for people to be engaged, like to engage enough to click on it. But what you do have to do is you have to be intriguing. And that is a very important mechanic about stories to get people to listen, right? So I use this example all the time where it's, if I just told you, like, hey, I went for a walk today, and I start talking about it, you'd be like, please stop talking, this is not interesting to me. But if I told you, I got in a car crash, and you'd be like, what? Like, wait, what happened? And like, then I start talking like, well, I went for a walk today. Now all of a sudden, you are so locked in, engaged, because you're trying to figure out how the frick does this walk lead to the result of getting a car crash, right? And so titles and thumbnails work exactly like this. They're not the story, but they are the intrigue to get you into the story. And so you have to like come out the gate knowing most people don't care about your video. They don't care about your channel. They don't want to watch your stuff. And so the game is like, how do I have that opener so strong that they have to engage with this now? And so when you have the like, I got in a car crash type delivery, they're going to click on this video. They're going, and as long as you do the rest of it right, they will watch it too.
Comes like even the car crash and everything. Like, how can you kind of connect your even like your thumbnail, your title, and even like the intro, so it kind of intrigues people like in the right way, so they keep on like to the whole video and the story. Like, is there like a right way to do that?
Yeah, for sure. So intrigue is interesting because nobody really defines what is intrigue, right? What even is this, right? And they'll just point at variables of like what is interesting, and it's not quite getting at intrigue. And I'm still trying to define this myself right now. But essentially, like what I have noticed is there are common correlators to what is supposed to be intriguing. For example, so You think of like how we have developed as humans. Like if you're, a primal ancestor and you're in, let's say, the wild, if you hear a sound, it's going to grab your attention because the possibility of it being a predator is high. So we already know how to use this against ourselves by making sound design really good. So when something sounds really good, it's doing this same thing that used to work on us, let's say like what, like 5,000, 10,000 years ago, and it's still working today, right? Another thing is like red, like works in thumbnails and works in intros because we've used this to seek out danger or more accurately identify danger quickly. And so the color that we see the most is green because we're trying to like that's like the forest that we're normally finding ourselves in. We're trying to like push out all that to look for the other colors that is not green because that's where a predator could be. And you'll see this in thumbnails. Like the least used color in all thumbnails is green. The most used color in all thumbnails is either going to be yellow or red because they stand out a lot. And if you look at traffic lights, they do the exact same thing. A green kind of just disappears in our head, but yellow and red stands out like a sore thumb because it's using psychology to get you to behave a certain way, right? And so when we're making our intros, like this stuff is helpful. Like I'm not even gonna lie. We say when you have certain sound effects in your intro, and you edit it a certain way, and you're putting certain colors, it will help. It won't get you there all the way. It's easy to look at this. I'll hear this a lot where people say like, but that's easy because it's well edited. It's like, yes, but it's not just that it's well edited. This is a big part, but it's not the only part. And same thing with like sound design. Like this is like elements that will 100% help with intrigue. I will say like something I don't see a lot of people talk about. I think they should talk about more is when you're using sound that's like within the real world. This is super satisfying. Like you'll see this a lot with like ASMR channels or like channels that are very niche within like the home steady type person, or they're like in like almost like old money type education, where if you use like this type of sound design where you're just recording, like let's say like I've done this before where like I use this trick where I drop a book on the ground when I'm going to talk about a book. It's objectively it's way more interesting to see a book fall into frame like this and you hear the sound of it hitting the wood. This will grab everyone's attention every single time. And so I already know if you do this in your first intro, your APV is going to be higher because we just introduce info in a way that most people won't. And then let's say like I go straight into the intro voiceover being like, this is the book on sale. I'm like, oh, hello. Like I am way more locked in than I would have been, right? But if I did the exact same video and it's just me holding a book in front of a camera, objectively that's not as interesting as what I just did. And so when you're able to communicate information in a way that is using these primal, these like internal primal signals that we have that we can't really get rid of, then you'll get people in a way that they won't really expect. And so I love using like real world sound versus like added on like synthetic sound design because I already know my video will be one, more unique, and two, it'll stand out. And most people just don't give the time to do this stuff. They just think like add some sound effects and call it a day. But this will already get you to stand out. That's like number two. It's like, what are your competition doing? What's your competition doing? And what can you do to essentially stand out? Like basically not doing any of that. Like how can you get to the same effect without doing any of the stuff that they do? So I mean, yeah. So, like I said, I'm still trying to define what even intrigue even is from a philosophical perspective. But I can definitely point out like these are common enough occurrences where I've seen them happen often. To where if you just do this alone, you will see a spike in ABD. But there's the other side of it where, I talked to Tyler at Beast where they say that they can just like dopamine max if they wanted to and just have this like the loudest possible sounds and the brightest possible colors and edit as fast as humanly possible, and you will probably hit the kids dopamine in their brains as high as possible. They just don't want to do that, and long term you'll have a diminishing return eventually. And so the idea of like chasing the dopamine alone is a losing game, but I'm not going to lie and say, oh, it doesn't work. No, it totally does. You just want to like have a balance.
Interesting. Yeah, even like with the sound design, of course like I think a lot of people heard that even like red like catches your attention and like all of that other stuff. Even the other things like I've heard like it's this thing like when you repeat something so many times, then it kind of stops working. Well, they did some study like 100 years ago, or I don't know what, that where they repeated kind of. I think it was a revolution, and then it stopped working, and it's kind of those things that really make a difference, but like nobody talks about them. Everybody, as you said, is talking about those tricks, but kind of those even human behavior stuff. Like not a lot of people talk about it. Even with the like sound design, like it makes so much sense when you hear it, but like you won't think about it. Like when like most people won't think about it when they're making a thumbnail or an intro or title.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah.
And to get like back to the thumbnail and title, like even like with the other how can you like connect, especially like your like thumbnail and title in the right way? Because like I've heard like many advice that like don't make it the same, like kinda you need to expand on it, or like what's your kind of take on like
Yeah.
titles?
Yeah, no, I fully agree because I use the term of like we don't want to double down on the same idea within our limited real estate. So if I say like this is the coolest thing in the world, I don't want my thumbnail text to be coolest thing in the world because I just already said that in the title. I want to like expand on the idea in a different way, like coolest thing in the world. And thumbnails like you've never seen this before, right? So now what I've just expanded on the title. So now I'm able to like essentially it's like having extension on the title versus like doubling down on that information in the title. And so I think this is super critical and useful, and I think everyone should totally do that. I have doubled down before. It's just very rarely do I do this. I've only done this if I feel insecure that I think it's not going to work. That's the only time I've ever done it. But yeah, I think that when it comes to like making good titles, I talk this a lot where like I read Shakespeare's sonnets to understand like what makes a good title a lot. So like when you read his sonnets, they're not meant to be read out loud. They're meant to be read internally. And that's how people read titles. They read them internally. And so it's interesting because it's like it's happening in your brain, but your brain is both registering the information while producing it at the same time. And so you want to make it sound pleasing to both be said and heard in your brain all at once. And that's why like his specifically his titles to his plays actually do this perfectly. Like Much Ado About Nothing just kind of rolls off the tongue, Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, or The Tragedy of Macbeth just flows right off, right? And with titles, they should actually do this. They should be the easier they are to read, the more likely they're going to one ingest the information and two associate like a positive response to your video. And so like I've seen this before, I think where there's like one where it's like I think someone had a video, I think it was called Sympathy for the Machine. And that was like one that was a great video. It was talking about how like talking about machines as if they had souls, like people. And I thought this was awesome. But that title was just like perfect, just absolutely perfect, where it gets the information across, but it still sounds pleasant to say out loud, or more importantly, internally, how everyone reads a title. And so I think this is super critical and never really talked about. But to be like clear, you don't have to do like what Shakespeare was doing, like iambic pentameter or anything. Might help. You don't have to. You really just want to think about it in terms of rhythm and think of like how easy is it to say. Like I talked to a screenwriter where he was saying like when you title a film, you want to give it like the 2 ticket test, where you say the title of the film. Can you say like 2 tickets to, and you say the title. So if it's like 2 tickets to the Titanic, okay, that was a little tricky, but I got there. So like that works, right? 2 tickets to the thing that did this. I'm like, dude, I can barely even say this thing in one breath, right? And so like, if you have a problem like that, like the odds are your title's gonna be a little trickier. And yeah, so that's usually where I start. Is like, is this information brief, like brevity is the soul of wit, and is this thing easy to say? And if I get there and I get like the general idea with the least amount of words, like you have like, in my opinion, like the most broad title you can possibly have.
It's so interesting. Even like the examples you give, that I think you take so much from even other like filmmaking industry and even like Shakespeare sonnets, and you kind of take it into kind of this YouTube space. And I think that's where it kind of works the most. And like, how do like it comes naturally to, or like how do you pick like what to kind of get from those other things, or what is working?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for me, like I started, like I didn't necessarily start in the YouTube industry. Like I started in traditional media. Like the last job that I had was for a TV show outside of being in YouTube. And during that time, I started reading like 100 books a year, and I did that for about 10 years. And so a lot of my information just comes from other places because that's just what I'm generally interested in. Like that's why I watched YouTube, because I just wanted to learn a lot. Like I didn't start watching YouTube because I was like, I'm going to be a YouTube strategist. I just liked learning, right? And once you have like all this info just in my head, to me it just all looks the same. Like it doesn't. I don't see it as like, oh, this is how you would go to approach writing a book. This is how you go to approach to like making a movie. This is how you go to approach making a YouTube video. To me, it's like that's all the same thing. That's not different. The only thing that's different is its medium. And in the medium, there's different because of in competition, viewer expectation, or audience expectation, and how you're going to interact with it. This is where it actually differs, and also how it's going to be distributed. But ultimately, it's like you're talking about the same stuff, right? So if you're writing a book, you want that first damn line to be really, 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 really good, the same you would in your first few words in a YouTube video. Same with your opening frames in a movie. He talks about in Whiplash, where he's like, opening frames are the most important thing to him, because like if you fail here, you don't get them back after this. And that's like, I love that, because that's what I talk about with YouTube all the time, where it's like, yeah, if you lose them here, you don't get them back, they're gone, right? And so I think like that approach applies everywhere, not just in YouTube. And so what's helpful is like, I think everyone should see YouTube like that. Like it's a new industry, and when you see a new industry, you should really think like, how do other industries do it? And then start applying that to this one. Otherwise, you're gonna be stuck copying like you'll have no other choice but to copy everybody else, because you're either going to be innovating or just doing what the latest person has done. And that's where like other industries like television, movies, and authorship differ, is they've been around for a long time, or more or less a long time. Like films have been around for like 100 years, TV shows about 60, 80, and books, I mean, as long as we've been able to write stuff down, like books have been around. But YouTube, 20 years. And it's like a baby, like very new. And I think people forget that. And like the internet is also pretty new. And I think people just forget how new this all is. And once you recognize that this is all new, that means there's so much more to be had that we have yet to figure out. Like right now, there's 100 million view videos sitting there waiting for someone to conjure up the idea, but nobody does it. They just don't, because they're too busy. Like, oh, this was a 1 out of 10, I should copy this. They're too busy doing that, because now they lose track of the thing that's so obvious. And one of these days, someone's gonna post that video, and everyone's gonna smack themselves in the head, be like, oh my God, why didn't we do that? Why didn't we come up with that? It's because you're too busy copying everyone else, And so I think like it's only helpful to look at everything else outside of YouTube. That's what I do these days. Like I barely look at YouTube for inspiration, because if I do that, I'm gonna copy everybody else. It's not gonna help me. And so once you look at everything else except YouTube, you can only come up with original ideas, because no one else is doing that.
So interesting. And yeah, that's an advice you wouldn't kind of expect from even other people, or like I think everybody nowadays is just copy everybody, copy what works, and somehow you will figure it out. But like this is, yeah, like it actually makes sense, like because human nature doesn't change. So people are using kind of the same principles, just like kind of wrapped up in a different way.
No, I fully agree, and I think it's funny. It's funny that you're right. Like to me, copying someone else, that's not a strategy. Like if I was a YouTuber, had my own channel, I could have just done that. Like I didn't need you to tell me that, right? I feel like if you're doing real strategy, it's like real like high level info. It's not just like, see this guy copied what they did, call it a day.
Yeah, like and it makes sense too. Like when you like kind of look at it now. So and kind of the question that comes in head, like when people like try to be original, or they take this kind of like even different idea, or kind of when they are making a thumbnail, they want to kind of put something. For example, if there's like designer, they want to kind of make it pretty, make it kind of give something from their industry, kind of added this thing and I add this thing. So how much do you need to kind of follow the rules of the game, of the YouTube game, and how much kind of can you let it flow, let even like your originality, and kind of, especially when you are a beginner, like how much do you need to follow the rules, and how much can you just kind of let your own kind of imagination go?
Yeah, yeah. I think like originality, like when I say making an original format, it's not that it's not impactful because it's original. Like like original isn't necessarily good. Like if I like I can make an original thumbnail that's bad. Like no one's ever done this, there's a reason, because it's not a good idea, right? Same thing with an original YouTube video. This is an original video, but it's not good, and that's why no one's ever done it. So coming up with an original idea is actually super easy. It's just coming up with an original idea that is effective. That's where it gets really hard. And to me, it's like I'd rather have the idea that's copied or stolen from somebody else, but it feels like it's incredibly effective the way I do it. And this will be like borrowing or stealing like an artist, right? But when it comes to like making that original concept that is effective. This is interesting because, you know, if you have the right instinct, like I do, like you'll know what is bad, and it's okay to make bad stuff. You just don't want to pretend that's the final verdict, right? Like we did some thumbnails before for a client, and that's like we're just, you know, all right, we're trying to break down the fundamentals, like what even is a thumbnail, like what even is it? And so we start with this like white background, and we ask like, okay, how many things can a take away from the image before it is no longer working as a thumbnail, right? And so let's say you have like a face in it, but you have no text, and you're like, okay, does this do the job? The answer is probably no. It probably doesn't do the job. So you need a really, really, really good title now to help juxtapose this image with this face. But this face, and now with text that's like says evil question mark with a little arrow pointing to him, this just did all of the work. We're like, oh, this juxtaposition just did everything. And if I took away that text, this no longer works as good as it used to. So you realize like, okay, what that teaches you is like this text was super damn important. So what we pick here is going to be really critical, right? But this is like the easiest way of how anyone can come up with an original thumbnail that can be effective. Is you just start with first principles, like what needs to be in this image and what can you take out before it just stops working, right? And so start with faces, start with text, and then like start with like backgrounds. Like how plain can they be? Can they be as plain as possible? That's how I like to do it. Like I think your background should be very minimal, and then the things that stand out will kind of stand out on their own. And yeah, and so the only other way to come up with something original is just like, I think if you look at like people who've been here before, so like marketers have been here before, like, you know, the show Mad Men, they're like an ad agency, and you see like they actually talk about like what makes a good ad, what makes a good like bulletin board or poster or whatever. They talk about like, you know, information that's hidden, information like the least amount of information as possible. It's actually funny because it's like, oh, this will actually teach you how to make good thumbnails. It's really like understanding like what's a, like good marketing is really what you want to understand. And once you understand that, then you'll start to understand like how to apply that to a thumbnail, even because what we're doing is very different. Like a bulletin board is like long term getting you to buy a product, but a thumbnail is a immediate, we need you to click on this thumbnail, this video right now to watch it. And so once you understand like the outcome is different, it'll teach you like how to apply those tricks to a different industry to a thumbnail.
Yeah. Like sometimes, like even when I look at some of those thumbnails, it is just like there's like a bland picture, like even a screenshot of from the video, and it has like you know, like 1 million views or something. And I'm always wondering like, is there a kind of right way to like make thumbnails, or is it just these people are so big, or they have audiences, or the guest is so kind of famous that anything will just work? Or now, but now when you said kind of even with the blank image, you need really kind of good title. So I'm kind of like can a very good title like save a bad thumbnail and kind of all of that. Just wanted to
No,
know your
no,
opinion.
the bad, yeah. If you have a bad title, a bad thumbnail, you'll know like your video won't perform super well. You need both for it to work. Yeah, and what's interesting is like about what you're saying about the guests. Like, so I love this conversation because everyone says like specifically for pods, a big like idea is like, oh, you know, you should have like guest is like the most important thing. I don't actually agree with that. I think like angle of guest is the most important thing, right? So this is a good example. So like we did for Dakota Genius, we did an episode with Roman, and obviously like Diary CEO got there first, and they're bigger and they're better than we are, so they're going to get 20 million views on that guest. But if we do it, we're not going to get 20 million views. But that being said, there's other people who have had Roman on their pod, and they've gotten less views than us, even though they're bigger than us, and even though they've been doing it longer, and the episode's been up longer. So by all accounts, they should get 10 times more views than we do. But we got 650,000 views on our first episode with 0 subscribers, zero direct traffic. It literally was just entirely organic. So, but I'll still have people tell me that the guest is more important than the angle. And I'm like, if that was the case, then these other people that had them on should have gotten more views than us, but they didn't. And the reason why is because like we were following like the tricks of the trade very carefully and very closely to minimize risk. And that's why we were able to get more success with less working in our favor.
What do you mean by kind of the angle of the guest?
Yeah. Yeah. So if let's say I have Roman and if I put Roman in a thumbnail and I have no text, like this is a very bad angle, right? I've decided to just put his face and pretend that's going to do it. But I did one where I did just have his face in, but I also had text that said by 2030 we're done in the text. and the text is red and the background is black, and he's pretty contrasted. And then the title was doing most of the work here, but that the juxtaposition of title plus thumb did a lot. But it's like my title was no, AI isn't conscious, it's actually far worse. And then with that title plus that thumbnail, that got us, with again 0 subscribers on the Clips channel, got us to 1.8 million views. And most people have them on, they don't get that kind of clout, they don't get that kind of thing. And everyone else will say, oh, it's because you have Roman. It's like, yeah, but we knew how to leverage Roman, and most people don't. And so I could have had Roman on and wasted, a 2 million view video and got 100,000 views. I still would have been like, oh, cool, big success, but not realizing I just lost, 90% of my viewership by doing that. If not, way more, like 95%.
Yeah, so it is just like, it's not just the face, it's kind of the other things, the idea, and like even those fundamental principles you talk about, like about a thumbnail that you added in, and kind of then it's maybe even the face would have got like 100,000 views, and for a new channel, yes, that would be great, but you wouldn't kind of get to that full potential that it kind of would have.
Absolutely. Yeah, because if it really was about the guest, like Elon Musk is probably one of the most famous people on planet Earth, right? If it really was about the guest, he should get 100 million views for every single pod he's on. But he doesn't. And it's like, that's interesting. Why? Well, some people hate him. Like, well, people watch people they hate all the time, right? And that's why they're polarizing. And that's why they get essentially a lot of clout. It's because of their polarization. And so if that was the case, then it should get more views because of that, not less. But I've seen him on pods where he got 1 million views. And it's like, that's actually not that impressive. That's like normal good podship behavior is what you would expect from a million views. And so that's what I find interesting is like you could have the most famous person on your pod and not do very well. That's the reason why Doak's highest performing videos are not the most famous people they've ever had. A lot of times it's people you've never heard of in a very niche industry. They just understand how to leverage them properly.
Kind of like I kind of started thinking about it, like even like my podcast is a kind of a business, and even these kind of podcasts you can think of them as the product, and kind of the packaging is kind of the marketing of it. So even when some people would click on kind of even the blank face, but like most people that don't know them wouldn't. So when they don't click, like YouTube that would not distribute them to like the people even who would click. It's like it just stays in kind of the bubble of it. At least that's the idea that first like came to mind when thinking about this.
Yeah, absolutely.
And like for the last topic, I wanted to touch on AI because I think like that's one of the biggest kind of topics to talk about now, especially with the thumbnails and titles, and especially like content in general. So I wanted to know your opinion on it.
I mean, where do you even begin? It's kind of a broad topic. Yeah, I mean, is there anything like specific about AI, like specifically?
Maybe how it will change. How do you think it will change the industry, especially with thumbnails, with titles, and even like with YouTube and strategy?
Yeah, it's going to change the industry the same way the Industrial Revolution changed the industry. Just not one, it changed all of them, right? Same thing with like the internet, how that changed. It won't just change YouTube, it'll change everything. Like everything will be different. So 40 years from now, what we do will be unrecognizable. I can't possibly predict what it'll look like because I couldn't predict, if I was in, before the Industrial Revolution, I couldn't predict what's going to come out the other side. I have no idea. All I know is like, you can't really prepare. You can only be like, the only way to kind of like prepare is just to be as vigilant and as aware of what's going on as possible, being as informed as possible, and then knowing how to move quick and how to adjust. Like ultimately, like, I don't want a lot of these things to be true, but it's like, this is just the messenger talking, where it's like thumbnail designers, like they're probably not going to be as needed as we want them to be, 40 years down the road. And that's just the reality of it. Like, same thing with like titles. It's like, I don't want that to be true either, but I even question, it's like, well, what if like, I think AI can probably come up with better titles than most people in probably like 10 years from now. And I don't want that to be the case, but it's like, I don't even know. Like, it's even possible for anyone to keep up. Because like, even if let's say like, even if AI, like right now, they're not as good as coming up with titles as I am, right? But they can come up with volume of titles better than I can. Like, sure, I can come up with a lot, but what, 1 million? Like, they can come up with like 1 million, and in like, not in a long time, like 5 minutes, right? And so if they come up with 1 million titles, there's no way they can't split test which one's the best. one of them's going to be the best, and they're going to figure it out faster than me. And so just that alone, their volume of work that they can do, and they never need to sleep, never need to eat, they don't get tired. None of that happens. It's like, I can't keep up. There's no way. I'm never gonna be able to keep up with that. And so that's gonna get kind of crazy, is because then all of a sudden everyone's gonna have access to the best thumbnail generator, the best thumbnail title generator on the planet, and I don't really know what competition looks like. I don't really know what's gonna happen then, right? It just feels like it'll be what everyone's kind of calling the singularity, and yeah, pretty intense stuff, I think, for sure. And I think what it'll come down to is like like the last resource is discernment of like which information should somebody listen to when it comes to like, should I use this AI tool over this one? My AI said this, is that correct? Like trying to figure out like what is even correct, what is even true anymore. I think that'll be the last thing that humans will have, is like the last agency they'll have is their discernment of what to follow. But yeah, so it's gonna change everything. Nothing will look the same, and it keeps me up at night all the time.
Yeah, well, to the first, like, I talked to some, like, kind of startup founders that work with AI and the big companies. Like, like, when I ask them for, like, their plans for the future, or their goals, they're like, I don't know what will happen in 2 weeks. Like, yeah, it's all just kind of crazy, and like all of it. So making plans doesn't make sense anymore. You just need to go, like, every step of the way. You need to kind of figure out, kind of, it's so changing that it doesn't matter, and kind of having a plan or something isn't really that effective. And like with the other thing, I think, even like it will come down to the even ideas, or like even the people, because like I think that, even now there are some kind of people who are kind of human art first or something like that, and like it may sound cheesy for first, but at the end of the day, even now we are not just kind of on YouTube for just the information. We are here for kind of even the ideas and the perspectives and the story too. And even like with coaching, I think the online courses kind of became dead, because the information, even AI can write you this one, but with the coaching, it is like you get the like experience. The person kind of can give you like so personalized advice that for like 99% of people it wouldn't work. So maybe it will come down to that, or like if I at least I have this theory.
Yeah. I mean, like, yeah, it's interesting because at the end of the day, I think like for a while, I don't know how long, but for a while, like humans are gonna have to be the ones that like make the final decision. I think like AI will help them be informed, to cut corners, to take what would have taken 8 hours can take them like now 2. And I think like in this area, like the short term, like AI is going to be super useful for those who make really good decisions, right? The time when it gets scary is when AI starts making better decisions than any human now. So now it's like, oh, they're starting to outsource the last important job that we do. At that moment, it's like, well, shoot, we're kind of all cooked now. Like, no, anyone in charge, they don't matter anymore. It's like, this thing's better at you. They're better than you at this job, right? So that's the moment when it's like, okay, no one's going to know what to do anymore. And this is going to be like, yeah, we have no freaking clue what's going to come next.
I think no one has any clue about like anything. Like maybe those like people like Roman you talked about, like maybe they have like better kind of perspective on what will happen. But even in today's age, even with the podcast, you kind of hear every other perspective, and I think nobody kind of knows what will happen. Even the kind of founders of the kind of big AI kind of companies. So yeah, we will
Yeah,
see. We
yeah,
will see.
yeah. Even the people making it don't even know. I
Yeah.
remember like how to, and everyone said like, what do you think's going to happen in the next 5 years? He was like, I have no clue. Like this guy, the prediction dude, he's like, I don't even know anymore. Like I don't know. Stop asking me.
Yes. And yeah, I think this is a great way to end this podcast. I've learned so much. I want to just thank you for being here and just sharing your wisdom on this stuff. It's been really helpful. I hope it helped the viewers. And thanks for being here. And thanks, people, for listening.
Of course. Thanks for having me.